The sound of my phone shattered the quiet at 2:17 a.m. It wasn't the soft buzz of a notification, but the sharp, jarring ring that makes your blood run cold before you even understand why. I'd always feared late-night calls. They never brought good news. My trembling hand reached for the phone on the third ring, the glow of the screen illuminating my small kitchen like a ghost light. "Mrs. Taylor," a voice said too calm to belong in this hour. "This is Officer Ramirez with the Chicago Police Department. There's been an accident. Your son, Andre Taylor." My heart stopped before he finished. "He didn't make it, ma'am. I'm so sorry." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The room swayed. My knees hit the linoleum and the phone slipped from my fingers. I remember the sound it made plastic hitting tile and the officer's voice faintly echoing through the receiver. I don't know how long I stayed there, clutching my chest, whispering my son's name like it could undo death. I drove to Mercy Hospital, still in my nightgown, under my coat, rain lashing against the windshield wipers, screaming against glass. The streets of Chicago blurred into streaks of red and white, and every traffic light felt like a cruel delay between me and the truth. When I arrived, the lobby was too bright, too sterile for grief. A nurse with kind eyes guided me to a private waiting room. "Someone's already here," she said softly. That someone was Nina, my daughter-in-law. She was sitting there perfectly composed, a silk scarf around her neck. Designer purse neatly at her feet. Mascara streaked her cheeks just enough to suggest sorrow, but her posture was flawless. When she looked up, her eyes were dry. "Bernice," she said, rising to hug me, her perfume something expensive and citrusy clinging to my coat. "I tried calling you. The doctor said there was nothing they could do." I nodded, unable to speak, my throat full of gravel. I searched her face for the kind of devastation that should live in a widow's eyes. I saw only calculation. "He was on his way home from work," she continued, her tone practiced. "He must have fallen asleep at the wheel." She sat down again, crossing her legs, her phone buzzing once, twice, 3 times before she silenced it without checking. I caught a glimpse of the wallpaper, a smiling photo of her and Andre from last Christmas. He'd looked tired even then. She looked radiant. A doctor entered, his voice gentle but final. "Mrs. Taylor, we did everything possible. The impact was severe." He passed instantly. I nodded again this time because words refused to exist. Nina dabbed her eyes with a tissue, but her gaze flicked to the officer standing in the doorway holding a small evidence bag, Andre's wallet, watch, and phone. Her pupils dilated not with grief, but interest. When I was finally led to see him, the world narrowed to the sterile smell of antiseptic and the sound of my own breathing. My son lay there still and cold, a bruise forming along his jaw. I touched his hand, it was already stiff, and whispered, "Mama's here, baby. Mama's here." Behind me, Nina's heels clicked faintly on the tile, the rhythm mechanical. "He looks peaceful," she said. He hated traffic. I wanted to scream at her to leave, but the weight of shock kept me silent. As I walked out, the officer handed me Andre's belongings. His phone was cracked, the screen still lit with the last call made his own voicemail at 1:58 a.m. The message was blank, just a few seconds of silence. But I felt deep in my chest that something had been left unsaid. I slipped the phone into my pocket and looked back once more through the glass door of the emergency ward. Nina stood there, her reflection merging with mine, 2 women linked by death, but divided by something darker. That night, standing in the parking lot under the harsh yellow lights, I whispered a promise to the rain. "I'll find out what really happened, Andre. I swear I will." The wind carried the words away, but the vow stayed inside me, sharp as broken glass. The next morning, Chicago felt too quiet, as if the whole city had paused to mock my loss. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at Andre's favorite mug, the one that still had a faint ring of coffee from his last visit. The house smelled of lavender cleaner and silence. Every clock ticked too loudly. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, relatives, neighbors, church friends, but I couldn't answer. Every time I tried to speak, grief rose in my throat like smoke. 2 days later, I stood in the front pew of Holy Trinity Church, clutching a damp tissue as the choir sang Amazing Grace. My son's casket gleamed under the stained glass light. I had buried my parents, my husband, even friends younger than me, but nothing prepared me to bury my child. It broke something inside that would never heal the same way again. Nina arrived in a black dress that clung to her like armor heels clicking across marble, as though she were walking a red carpet. Cameras flashed outside. She had invited the local paper for a tribute feature. During the service, she dabbed her eyes with precision, ensuring each tear fell neatly gracefully. Beside her sat Carter, my 9-year-old grandson, in a suit too big for his thin shoulders. His small fingers clung to a folded photo of his father. When the pastor called me to speak, my knees almost buckled. Deacon Paul Jefferson, who had known me for 30 years, helped me stand. I could feel his steady hand on my arm, grounding me in the chaos. "Take your time, Sister Bernice," he whispered. I stepped up to the podium. The church was full, Andre's co-workers, childhood friends, even old clients he'd helped pro bono. My voice trembled. My son was a man who fixed things. He fixed cars, broken fences, people's problems. But he couldn't fix a heart that stopped too soon. My eyes drifted toward Nina. If you knew Andre, you knew kindness lived in his bones. My words cracked, but I finished. And I pray we honor him not in how we cry, but in how we care for those he left behind. Applause would have been out of place, but the quiet nods and bowed heads were enough. Nina dabbed her eyes again. "Beautiful," she whispered loud enough for people to hear. I knew it was for show. Her lipstick hadn't even smudged. After the service, I stood near the casket as mourners passed. One woman pressed my hand. "He helped me save my house when the bank tried to foreclose. Didn't charge me a dime." Another said he always spoke of you. Ms. Bernice. Said you were his strength. Their words were bittersweet medicine. Each one cut and healed at once. Nina, meanwhile, stood at the church doors, greeting people like a hostess. I caught her telling one of Andre's old colleagues he was working too much. I told him to slow down, but he never listened. The lie slid off her tongue like silk. She didn't see me watching. Or maybe she did and didn't care. Outside, rain began again. As the pallbearers carried the casket to the hearse, I walked beside it, my hand on the polished wood. The scent of roses mixed with wet concrete and exhaust fumes. Nina walked behind me, talking quietly on her phone. Not once did she look at the casket. Back home, I sat alone in the dim living room, the walls closing in. Deacon Paul stopped by later with soup and quiet prayers. "You're not alone, Bernice," he said softly, "but you'll feel like you are." He was right. When the house finally fell silent that night, I sat in the dark with Andre's photo on my lap. His smile in the frame felt alive, kind, and far away. I whispered into the stillness, "If you're still here, give me strength." Somewhere deep inside, I swore I heard him answer just the faintest whisper of a promise not yet fulfilled. 3 weeks after this funeral, the world expected me to return to normal. People assumed grief came with an expiration date, that you could fold it away like winter clothes. But every morning I woke to the same dull ache. The air in my house still smelled faintly of Andre's cologne, and I found myself listening for the sound of his old truck pulling into the driveway. The silence was cruel. Nina called one afternoon. "Bernice, I need to stop by and pick up some of Andre's paperwork. Insurance things." Her tone was clipped impatient, as if she were arranging a delivery, not dealing with her husband's death. When she arrived, she wore sunglasses indoors and carried a designer bag big enough to smuggle secrets. She didn't waste time. "Do you happen to know if Andre mentioned any accounts savings, maybe, or documents from work?" My fingers tightened around my teacup. "He didn't talk about money with me," I said quietly. "He just worked hard to make sure you and Carter were provided for." "Well, yes," she said, glancing around the room, "but there were complications. His company said the insurance payout could take months. I might have to borrow against the house." Her eyes flicked toward the framed photos on the bookshelf, Andre at his graduation, Andre holding baby Carter. "He loved you both," I said, but she didn't look at the photos. She looked at the keys hanging near the door. "Can I have the spare keys to his condo?" she asked. "I want to pack up his things." "I'll come with you," I offered. Her smile froze. "That won't be necessary, Bernice. It's painful for me." Something in her voice, it wasn't grief. It was control, the same tone I used to hear from clients who wanted sympathy while hiding a lie. I handed her the keys but kept the spare. My gut told me to. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how quickly Nina had moved on, how she'd turned Andre's funeral into a performance. So the next morning I drove to his condo myself. The air was stale heavy with dust and forgotten plans. On his desk, I found his laptop still plugged in the screen asleep. My fingers hesitated before pressing a key. The desktop flickered to life. Folders, work documents, and one file stood out, an unsent email draft. The subject line read, "Divorce Draft. Confidential." My heart lurched. I clicked it open. The message was written to a law firm downtown. I want this finalized before July. I'll deliver the paperwork in person. I can't live like this anymore. The timestamp 2 weeks before the accident. Attached was a PDF Andre's signed divorce petition. The room began to spin. I sat down hard in his chair, clutching my chest. Divorce. He'd never told me. The boy who called me every Sunday had kept the biggest secret of his life. My first instinct wasn't anger, it was sorrow. Had he been that unhappy? Had Nina made his life so unbearable that he'd chosen silence over confrontation? I opened his drawer, searching for more. Inside, I found a half-written note. If something happens, Mom knows what to do. But I didn't. I didn't know anything. I printed the email, my hands trembling, and tucked it into my purse. As I turned to leave, I noticed the answering machine blinking red one new message. I pressed play. It was Andre's voice, weary but steady. Nina, we need to talk. I can't keep doing this. I filed the papers. Please don't make me regret this. Then silence. Then a soft sigh before the beep. I stood frozen. My son had been alive, defiant, tired, and afraid all at once. And now he was gone. When I stepped out into the hallway, Nina was there standing by the elevator holding a box of Andre's clothes. Her smile was too bright. Oh, you're here, she said smoothly. I was just cleaning up. My purse felt heavy with the papers inside. Her perfume filled the hall, sweet, poisonous. I nodded and walked past her, the secret burning in my chest. For the first time since his death, I felt something other than grief. I felt suspicion and a quiet, dangerous resolve. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the printed divorce papers. The sunlight spilling through the blinds felt too clean, too bright for what I was holding. My hands trembled as I traced Andre's signature, steady, deliberate, like a man who had made peace with a painful choice. The date beneath it mocked me, June 3rd, 2 weeks before the crash. I called the only person I trusted with something this heavy, Deacon Paul Jefferson. He'd seen the worst of people during his years at the social service center, yet he never lost faith in the possibility of redemption. When he arrived, I slid the papers across the table. He read them silently, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. You sure she doesn't know? He asked softly. No, but she's already circling like a vulture, asking about insurance accounts, everything. She's not mourning Paul. She's strategizing. He nodded, rubbing his chin. Andre was a good man, but maybe he finally saw who she was. I swallowed hard. He changed the insurance beneficiary, I whispered. He made me the one. Then he was protecting you, Paul said. And that little boy, too. You can't let her know, Bernice. Not yet. You think she'd fight it? I asked, though I already knew. If she gets wind of this, she'll drag you through hell to keep her story clean. His words clung to me long after he left. That night, I found myself sitting in Andre's old room staring at his framed degree. He'd built his life from nothing, just like I had. Every inch of that diploma represented sacrifice, ambition, and a promise. We rise together. The next day, I took the papers to a lawyer named Harold Green, an old friend of Paul's. His office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old law books. He adjusted his glasses as I handed him the documents. Well, Mrs. Taylor, he said after reading them, your son wasn't bluffing. He filed this with Cook County Court 2 weeks before he passed. It's official. My chest tightened. So it's legal. Yes, but it wasn't finalized yet. And here's the twist, he also changed his life insurance policy on the same day. The beneficiary is you, not his wife. The words felt heavy. She doesn't know that, I said quietly. Then keep it that way, Harold replied, his tone firm. If she finds out, she'll contest it, and you'll be dragged into a public circus. Right now, the paperwork's processing quietly. The less attention, the better. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the silence. He must have known something was coming, I murmured. He must have known she'd make this ugly. Or he just wanted to make sure his mother was safe, Harold said gently. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. He always did. Even as a boy, he used to hide his allowance in my Bible, said it was for emergencies. I never imagined the emergency would be his death. On my way home, the city looked different. The skyscrapers loomed like silent judges. The trains rattled with indifference. I watched people rushing across intersections, all of them unaware of how fragile their plans really were. When I got home, I found a message on my voicemail from Nina. Her voice was sweet as honey, but too rehearsed. Hey, Mom, just checking in. I was wondering if Andre had any recent changes to his accounts. I keep finding random letters from banks. Call me when you can, I deleted the message. Later that evening, Carter called from Nina's house. His voice was small, uncertain. Grandma, Mommy said Daddy left us lots of money. Is that true? My throat tightened. Your daddy left Love, baby. That's worth more than money. But Mommy said Love doesn't pay rent, he said softly. I closed my eyes. Nina had started feeding him poison already. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Not yet. I had to move like Andre did, quietly, carefully, patiently. That night I placed Andre's photo on my nightstand. The soft light from the lamp fell across his face. You knew what you were doing, I whispered. You were trying to protect us. I won't let that go to waste. Outside, thunder rolled across the Chicago sky. I felt something shift inside me, not peace, not anger, but a fierce clarity. I had a secret that could destroy Nina's empire of lies, and for now that secret was my armor. A week later, I decided to try something I hadn't done since Andre's funeral, call Nina, not as an enemy, but as a mother trying to save what little family we had left. I'd spent nights staring at Carter's picture, that small face, too young to understand loss, and too innocent to be trapped between truth and manipulation. I told myself, maybe if I stay close, I can protect him. It was a foolish hope, but sometimes hope is all a mother has. When Nina picked up, her voice was sugar sweet. Bernice, how lovely to hear from you. I was just about to call. Carter's been missing you. The lie was smooth, too smooth. Maybe I can stop by and see him, I said carefully. Maybe pick him up after school this week. There was a pause long enough for me to imagine her calculating the angles. Oh well, that might be tricky, she said finally. He's got piano lessons and therapy sessions, and I'm managing everything alone. But maybe if you could help with some of the costs, I could make it work. Costs, I asked. You know, private school tuition, extracurriculars, all that, she said lightly. I'm sure Andre would have wanted you to be involved. My stomach tightened. How much are we talking about? $500 a month, she said without a blink. For Carter's sake, of course. I hesitated. My pension wasn't much, but I said yes. Because it wasn't about Nina, it was about the boy who still called me Grandma. The first time I picked Carter up from school, he ran into my arms with a force that nearly knocked me over. His small fingers clung to my coat, his voice muffled against my shoulder. I missed you, Grandma. I swallowed hard. I missed you more, baby. I took him for ice cream, listened as he told me about school and the nightmares that woke him at night. Mom says Daddy's watching over us, he said. But she also says he was tired of us before he died. The words hit like a blade. That's not true, I said quickly. Your daddy loved you more than anything. Carter frowned, confused. Then why doesn't Mommy like to talk about him? I didn't have an answer. Instead, I reached across the table, holding his small hand in mine. You keep your daddy in your heart, okay? That's where he lives now. For a brief, shining moment, I felt peace, like maybe I could build something good out of this wreckage. But peace never lasts long when greed has a seat at the table. A few weeks later, I called Nina to ask if I could have Carter for the weekend. Her tone shifted instantly, sharp and cold. Actually, that's not going to work, she said. He's got plans. Plans, he's 9. Don't start Bernice, she snapped. I appreciate the help, but this isn't your place. You're not his guardian, you're his grandmother. I tried to stay calm. I just want to spend time with him. And I want stability for my son, she said. That means no confusion, no old grief hanging around. Old grief, I whispered. You know what I mean? She said, her voice dripping disdain. Andre's gone. It's time we all moved on. That night I sat alone at my kitchen table, a stack of unpaid bills beside me, and the memory of Andre's laugh echoing through my head. I'd spent my life helping other families rebuild after tragedy, but I couldn't fix my own. When Carter called the next evening, I could hear Nina in the background, her tone clipped, irritated. Tell Grandma you're busy, she muttered. I miss you, Carter whispered through the phone. I miss you too, baby, I said softly. You remember our song? He hummed a few off-key notes of You Are My Sunshine. My throat tightened. That's right. You never forget that, okay? After the call ended, I stared at the divorce papers hidden in my drawer. Andre had tried to free himself from her, and now I was chained in his place. I realized then that hope could be a dangerous thing. It makes you reach for light in people who live off shadows. I whispered into the dark. You were right, Andre. She never loved you. She just loved what you gave her. The room was silent except for the faint sound of rain hitting the window. For the first time, I wondered if silence wasn't peace, but punishment. By midsummer, Nina's mask began to slip. Grief had turned into something polished and marketable for her. She launched an online campaign called Carter's Future Fund, with glossy photos of herself and my grandson smiling under captions like, "A young widow fighting for her son's dreams." The donations poured in hundreds, then thousands. People who didn't know a thing about Andre were sending sympathy money to a woman who couldn't even look at his grave without checking her reflection in her phone. I watched it all unfold from the glow of my laptop in the dark, my stomach twisting tighter with every post. The next Sunday at church, Deacon Paul leaned toward me and whispered, "That girl is performing, not grieving." I nodded because I'd seen it too, the perfect tears, the poised interviews. Nina had turned tragedy into a brand. 2 days later, I stopped by her apartment unannounced to drop off a birthday gift for Carter. When she opened the door, her expression flickered between surprise and annoyance. Behind her, music pulsed from a speaker, and a man's laughter echoed from the kitchen. "Oh," she said quickly, blocking the view with her body, "just a friend from work helping me fix the sink." I glanced past her shoulder. The man was tall, wearing Andre's old sweatshirt, the gray one with the Chicago Bears logo. My pulse kicked up. "That's Andre's sweater," I said quietly. "He loved that one." Nina forced a smile. "Oh, this Carter must have left it out. Anyway, we're busy, Bernice." She tried to close the door, but I pressed my hand against it. "Busy doing what?" Her eyes hardened. "Don't start. I'm rebuilding my life, okay? That's what Andre would have wanted." "Andre wanted honesty," I said. "He wanted peace. And peace costs money," she snapped, slamming the door in my face. I stood there in the hallway, heart hammering, listening to her laughter on the other side. It wasn't grief. It was victory. Later that night, curiosity overpowered restraint. I searched her name online and found the fundraiser. The comments were full of strangers calling her an inspiration. The total was nearly $50,000. Then I noticed something else. She had listed herself as sole guardian and legal beneficiary. My breath caught. She was rewriting history, erasing Andre as though he'd never planned to leave her. The next day, while cleaning out a drawer, I found the key to Andre's truck, the same Chevy Silverado he'd saved years to buy. He used to call it his therapy on wheels. Out of impulse, I drove to the garage where he'd kept it. The manager looked up when I mentioned his name. "Oh, you're his mom? His wife already sold it last month. Cash sale." My heart dropped. "Sold it?" "Yeah," he said, checking a logbook. "She said he'd have wanted her to move on. Kind of fast, if you ask me." I walked out the summer heat, pressing down like judgment. That truck had been his pride, his symbol of freedom, and she'd turned it into quick money. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the divorce papers in my bag, fighting the urge to scream. When I told Deacon Paul, he sighed deeply. "Some people feed on attention, Bernice. They can't survive without being seen." "She's not just being seen," I said. "She's building a stage on my son's grave." That night I scrolled through her posts again. One picture stopped me cold, Nina at a charity gala, smiling beside a man in a tailored suit, the same man from her apartment. The caption read, "Learning to smile again." My hands shook as I read the comments. People called them beautiful, strong, the perfect example of love after loss. I closed the laptop and stared into the dark, the glow of the screen still burning behind my eyelids. For the first time, anger drowned out grief. But beneath that anger was something quieter, resolve. I had spent my life believing in mercy and patience and forgiveness. But mercy for a snake only invites another bite. I whispered to the empty room. "She thinks this is over, Andre. She doesn't know what you left behind." The photo of my son on the mantel caught a sliver of moonlight. His eyes seemed to meet mine, steady and knowing. Somewhere deep inside I felt a shift. The woman who'd been paralyzed by grief was gone. What replaced her was older, colder, and far less forgiving. That Sunday I went back to church for the first time since Andre's funeral. I sat in the same pew where I'd wept beneath the stained glass light, only this time I didn't cry. I stared straight ahead, my hands folded tightly in my lap as the choir sang about grace and forgiveness. Words that once comforted me now felt like salt in an open wound. When the service ended, Deacon Paul found me still sitting there. "You're holding too much in, Bernice," he said gently. "Grief turns sour if you feed it with anger." I looked up at him. "Then what am I supposed to feed it with, Paul? She's out there parading around in my son's name, spending money she didn't earn, raising his boy on lies." He studied me for a long moment before speaking. Justice isn't revenge, sister. It's protection of what's right. You know the difference. I wanted to argue, but his words hit something deep. I realized that every instinct in me screamed to expose Nina, to call the reporters, to post the divorce papers online, to show the world who she really was. But that would stain Andre's memory. The world would remember him not as the man who worked himself to exhaustion for his family, but as the husband who wanted to leave. And I couldn't let his legacy be defined by her poison. That night I sat on the porch with a cup of tea gone cold and whispered into the summer air, "I'll stay silent for now." But silence doesn't mean surrender. I knew what I was doing went against every mother's instinct. I wasn't protecting myself, I was protecting the image of a man who no longer had the chance to defend himself. That was my burden to bear. The next day I dropped by Nina's apartment with a box of Andre's things, photos, a watch, his old Bible. She opened the door with a practiced smile phone in hand, still in the middle of a video call. "Oh, Bernice, how sweet of you. I'm just on with a potential sponsor for the fundraiser," she said. Her tone had the same shallow sweetness as frosting on a burnt cake. I placed the box on the table. "These belong to Andre," I said quietly. "Thought you might want them for Carter." "Sure," she said without looking. Then, without missing a beat, "By the way, the insurance company reached out again. They said there might be some delay. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" My heart thudded once hard. "No," I said. "I don't." Her eyes narrowed for a moment, then the phone buzzed again, and she returned to her call. I turned to leave, but Carter's small voice stopped me. "Grandma." He stood at the hallway, holding Andre's Bible. "Can you read me something from Daddy's book?" Nina frowned. "Carter, Mommy's busy." "It's okay," I said softly, kneeling down to his level. I opened the worn pages and read, "Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not boast. It is not proud." I paused, my voice trembling. "That was your daddy, baby. That's who he was." Carter smiled faintly, and for a second I thought I saw Andre in his eyes. When I left that apartment, I knew I'd made my choice. I would not fight Nina with noise. I would fight her with truth and silence, waiting for the moment when her own lies collapsed under their weight. Sometimes the loudest justice isn't shouted, it's written in patience and faith. And when that time came, I would be ready. It was late September when the final illusion shattered. The air in Chicago had turned crisp, carrying that smell of burning leaves and cold metal that comes before the first frost. I'd been calling Nina for 3 days, trying to check on Carter, but she didn't answer. The silence gnawed at me until I drove across town to her apartment complex, the old brick building where Andre had once lived before he could afford better. The hallway lights flickered, and somewhere a radio played faintly behind closed doors. When I reached her floor, I saw the door to her unit cracked open. I froze. Inside, her voice carried sharp and impatient. "I told you once the insurance clears, I'm done with this kid. Chicago's finished for me. LA's calling. I've earned this." A man's deeper voice responded, "And the boy?" Nina laughed, a sound so cruel it cut through me like glass. "He'll be fine with his grandma. She's desperate to play mother again." I couldn't breathe. My pulse pounded in my ears. I stepped closer, the words ringing louder with each one she spoke. "I can't keep living in that boy's shadow," she continued. "Everywhere I go, people call me the widow. I want my life back. Once the money hits, I'm gone." My hand shook as I pushed the door open. The sound startled her. She spun around, eyes wide, the color draining from her face. "Bernice, you scared me. You were talking about leaving," I said, voice trembling. "Leaving Carter here like he's a bag of old clothes." Her lips twitched into that fake smile she wore like a mask. "You must have heard wrong. I heard every word." I snapped. "You think I don't know what you've done? You've been selling Andre's things, lying to strangers, using that child for your pity parade." She straightened her expression, turning cold. "You have no idea what I've been through." "I know exactly what you've done," I said. "And one day the truth will find you." She smirked, stepping closer until I could smell the wine on her breath. "Truth," she said. "The truth is whatever people believe. And they believed me." I stared at her, really looked at her, and saw what Andre must have seen in those last months, the empty soul behind the beautiful face. "You don't love anyone," I said quietly. "Not even your own son." Her hand twitched just a flicker, but it was enough. "Get out," she hissed. I didn't move. "You'll leave that boy when the money comes. You'll abandon him, and I'll be waiting." "If you think a court would give you custody, you're delusional," she sneered. You're a retired social worker with a pension and an old house. I'm his mother. You're just the past. I left before she could see me cry. The elevator ride down felt endless. My reflection in the metal doors didn't look like me anymore. It looked older, harder, like someone forged in loss. When I reached the parking lot, I sat behind the wheel and let the tears come. I had protected Andre's secret out of love, believing silence was noble. But silence had given her power. She'd twisted grief into gold motherhood, into manipulation. My son had tried to escape her, and now his child was the next in her trap. That night I called Deacon Paul. My voice was steady this time. I can't stay quiet anymore. Then don't, he said. But don't fight her with anger, Bernice. Fight her with truth. The truth, I repeated, gripping the phone. That's all Andre wanted. When I hung up, I opened my drawer and pulled out the divorce papers. The ink of Andre's signature glistened faintly under the lamp. I felt him there in the quiet. You tried to protect us, I whispered. Now it's my turn. The next morning, I made an appointment with Harold Green. If Nina wanted to play with lies, I was done being her audience. It was time to bring the curtain down. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, the city still wrapped in that pale blue quiet that comes before traffic and noise. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at Andre's divorce papers spread out in front of me like a map leading to justice. For months, I had prayed for peace, but peace wouldn't come until truth did. I drove downtown to meet attorney Harold Green, my heart steady, my hands no longer shaking. His office sat on the 12th floor of an old building overlooking the river, the kind of place that smelled like polished wood and expensive paper. When I walked in, he looked up from his desk, his eyes soft with understanding. "You're ready," he said simply. I nodded. "She's planning to run, to leave the boy. I can't let that happen." I handed him the printed emails, the voicemail transcript, the fundraiser screenshots, every piece of proof I'd gathered in secret. Harold skimmed through the stack, then leaned back in his chair. "This is enough to file for emergency guardianship," he said, "and to freeze her accounts until the investigation finishes." I exhaled slowly, part fear, part relief. "Will it hold? If she's using your grandson for financial gain?" He said it will. "But we need something stronger, a recording or direct admission of intent." I pulled my phone from my bag. "I already have one. I played the audio I'd recorded the night before outside Nina's apartment." Her voice came through crisp and clear. "Once the insurance clears, I'm done with this kid." Harold's eyebrows rose. "That'll do." He smiled for the first time. "You're sharper than most clients I've had." "I spent 30 years reading people's lies," I said quietly. "You learn to listen for the cracks." He started drafting papers. The rhythmic tap of his pen on the desk matched the steady beat of my pulse. "We'll file a petition for guardianship this afternoon," he said, "and submit the divorce documents to the court as supporting evidence. Once the judge sees Andre had legally filed before his death, Nina's claim as surviving spouse weakens. She'll lose the insurance and custody leverage." I felt my throat tighten. "He wanted to protect us even in death," I murmured. Harold nodded. "And you're finishing what he started." When I left his office, the autumn wind sliced through the city like a warning. The sky was heavy gray, the kind of weather that smelled like change. I walked past the courthouse steps, watching people move with purpose, some seeking justice, others running from it. For the first time, I understood both. That evening, I met Deacon Paul at the diner near my house. He stirred his coffee as I told him everything. "So you're taking her to court," he said. "Good. But remember, truth cuts both ways. You can't go in carrying hate." "I'm not carrying hate," I said. "I'm carrying Andre's voice." "Then speak it loud," he said, "and let God handle the echo." That night I sat at my desk writing a letter to Carter, sealing it in an envelope labeled "For When You're Old Enough." I told him the truth, not about Nina's lies or the court battle, but about his father's love. I wrote, "Your daddy wanted peace. He wanted you to grow up in a world where truth matters more than appearances. I hope you believe that someday." I signed it and slipped it into my Bible right between Psalms and Proverbs. When the morning sun rose over Chicago, I stood by the window and whispered, "It's time." The reflection staring back at me wasn't the grieving mother anymore. It was the woman Andre raised a fighter, steady and unflinching. Before leaving for the courthouse, I looked once more at his photo. "We're almost there, baby," I said. "Justice is coming." And for the first time since he died, I felt his answer not in words, but in the quiet strength that filled the room like light breaking through a storm. The courthouse on LaSalle Street felt colder than I remembered: high ceilings, marble floors, and the faint echo of heels and whispered prayers. I'd walked those halls many times before as a social worker guiding other mothers who'd lost their children to the system. But that morning I was walking for my own blood. For Andre. For Carter. Nina arrived late as expected. She swept through the doors wearing a white dress, pearls, and that polished grief she'd learned to wear like jewelry. Her lawyer, a sharp young man with slicked back hair, carried her bag and whispered strategy. She didn't look at me, but when her eyes finally met mine across the room, there was no sorrow, only disdain. I sat beside Harold Green at the petitioner's table, my hands clasped in my lap, the divorce documents neatly stacked in front of me. The bailiff called the session to order. Case 4871C, Taylor v. Wallace, petition for guardianship and review of insurance beneficiary. My name, her name, my son's name. They all sounded strange in that sterile room, stripped of love and history. The judge, an older black woman with tired eyes, looked at us both and sighed. Let's begin. Nina's lawyer went first. Your Honor, my client. Mrs. Nina Wallace Taylor has single-handedly raised her son after the tragic death of her husband, Mr. Andre Taylor. She has organized community support, raised funds for their future, and maintained stability in a time of grief. This petition from the respondent, Mrs. Bernice Taylor, while emotionally understandable, is unnecessary and cruel. He gestured toward me as if I were the villain in the story. This is a grieving widow, not a criminal. Nina lowered her eyes, theatrically dabbing a tear. I wanted to stand up and shout, "You practiced that in the mirror." But Harold's hand brushed mine. Wait. When it was our turn, he rose slowly, the weight of quiet authority in every word. Your Honor, we don't deny the tragedy. But what's at issue here is truth. And truth is not cruelty, it's correction. He turned to the clerk. We submit Exhibit A, the official divorce filing by the late Mr. Andre Taylor, dated June 3rd, 2 weeks before his death. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Nina's head snapped up. What she hissed. Her lawyer whispered frantically, flipping through his notes. The judge adjusted her glasses. Is this document verified? Yes, Your Honor, Harold replied. Filed with Cook County Court. Signed and dated. We also submit Exhibit B, a recorded statement from Mrs. Wallace in which she states, and I quote, "Once the insurance clears, I'm done with this kid." Gasps broke out behind us. The judge's gavel struck the wood. Order. Nina's face drained of color. That recording was illegal, she shouted. She's lying. Harold remained calm. It was made outside her residence. Admissible under Illinois law. We also have documentation of funds raised under false pretenses. GoFundMe withdrawals unrelated to child expenses. He held up bank records. $8,200 spent on travel, $400 on personal shopping. All within 6 weeks of her husband's passing. Nina stood abruptly, her voice breaking into panic. You don't understand. Andre was going to cancel the divorce. He loved me. He was confused. I rose slowly. My legs trembled, but my voice didn't. He wasn't confused. The courtroom fell silent. I met the judge's gaze, then looked straight at Nina. My son filed those papers because he wanted peace. He called you the night he died, and he said, "Please don't make me regret this." He tried to build a life where his son could grow up safe, but you took that from him. You took his car, his clothes, even his story. My voice cracked. But you will not take his child. The judge's gavel struck again, softer this time. Mrs. Taylor, please take your seat. I sat, but I could feel the tide shift. Nina's mask was cracking, her voice shrill, her hands trembling. You think you can take my son? She spat. I'm his mother, and you were willing to leave him, Harold said evenly. The recording says enough. The judge leaned back silent for a long moment, then spoke. Mrs. Wallace, this court is deeply troubled by your conduct. The petition for guardianship is granted to Mrs. Taylor pending a full review. Furthermore, the life insurance beneficiary stands as filed, Mrs. Taylor. Nina's mouth opened, but no sound came. The gavel came down again. Court adjourned. For a moment, the world went still. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just sat there as the weight of months of secrets of silence of my son's ghost lifted off my shoulders. Nina gathered her purse and stormed out her heels, echoing like the final beat of a hollow drum. As she passed me, she hissed, You think you won, you'll see what winning costs. I didn't answer. I just looked at her and said softly, Justice always costs something, Nina. You just never thought you'd have to pay. Outside, the air smelled of rain and cold steel. I stood on the courthouse steps looking up at the gray Chicago sky. For the first time in months, I felt Andre near me, not as a voice, not as a ghost, but as calm. The fight was over, and the truth had finally spoken. The weeks after the court ruling passed in a strange haze. Victory, I learned, didn't taste sweet. It tasted like quiet. The world didn't stop for justice. It just went on, leaving you standing still, unsure what to do with the silence left behind. Carter was living with me now. The first morning he woke up in my house, he padded into the kitchen barefoot, his hair wild, his eyes sleepy. "Grandma," he said, "can we make pancakes like Daddy used to?" I turned away quickly before he could see the tears rising. "Of course, baby," I whispered, reaching for the flour. It became our ritual pancakes every Saturday morning, just the way Andre liked them, slightly burnt around the edges. For a while, that was enough to make the house feel like home again. Then one afternoon, Harold called. "You might want to turn on the news," he said. My heart sank before I even reached the remote. The headline flashed across the screen, "Local widow accused of fraudulent charity scheme." They were showing Nina's picture, her perfect smile now cracked beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the Cook County Jail. Reporters swarmed as she was led away in handcuffs. The anchor's voice was detached. Professional authorities alleged that Mrs. Wallace misappropriated more than $60,000 in donations from her late husband's memorial fund. I turned the volume down and just sat there. There was no joy in it, no triumph, only an ache deeper than pity. 2 days later, I received a letter. It came from the jail, folded neatly inside a plain white envelope. My name was written in neat cursive, her handwriting. I almost threw it away, but curiosity and something like guilt made me open it. The letter was short. "You won, Bernice. Maybe you always would have, but I wish you'd told me sooner. Maybe I wouldn't have become this person. Maybe I'd have tried to be better. I hope Carter forgets me before he hates me." I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. For a moment, I saw her not as the woman who'd destroyed my son's peace, but as another broken soul, one who'd mistaken greed for power and found herself trapped in her own performance. "You had your chances," I whispered. "You just never wanted truth without applause." I folded the letter and walked outside the autumn air, sharp and clean. At the back of my yard, I set it alight in an old metal bowl. The paper curled and blackened, the words dissolving into smoke that drifted upward like a prayer I couldn't bring myself to say. Deacon Paul stopped by later with groceries. When I told him about the letter, he sighed. "The Lord's justice isn't always thunder, Bernice. Sometimes it's just the sound of doors closing." I nodded, watching the smoke fade. "I didn't want revenge," I said. "I just wanted peace for Andre." "And you got it," he said. "But peace always comes after the storm." That night, after Carter went to bed, I sat in Andre's old room. The walls were still painted the same soft gray, his old baseball glove hanging by the window. The city hummed quietly outside. I thought about all the things I'd lost: my son, my faith in people, even parts of myself. But I'd also gained something that could never be taken again, the certainty that truth, no matter how long it hides, always finds light. I looked at Andre's photo and whispered, "She says I won, but I didn't. You did. You won by seeing her for who she was before the world did." I touched the frame, feeling his warmth in memory alone. Outside, a siren wailed and faded into the night, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free, not from pain, but from the need to carry it. 3 years later, the seasons in Chicago still changed, but inside our small house, time felt softer. The sharp edges of grief had dulled into something tender, almost sacred. I had grown used to the quiet rhythm of mornings with Carter, the sound of cereal pouring into a bowl, the click of his pencil as he did homework at the kitchen table, the hum of the radio playing old gospel songs that once made me cry, but now made me smile. Carter was 12 now, tall for his age, his father's eyes and my stubbornness stitched together in one boy. He still asked about Andre sometimes, though, less than before. "Do you think Daddy would be proud of me?" he asked one night as I tucked him in. The question caught me like a hook in the chest. "He already is," I said, brushing his hair back. "Every good thing you do, every kind word you speak, that's him living through you." He nodded, satisfied, and drifted to sleep with the same gentle breathing his father once had. Life was quiet, but not empty. I spent my days volunteering at the community center again, helping other mothers navigate the same systems I once worked inside. Sometimes I'd see women sitting there, lost holding stacks of papers with shaking hands, and I'd think, that was me once. I'd tell them, you don't have to shout to be strong. You just have to keep standing. One autumn afternoon, Carter's school held an open house. When I arrived, his teacher pulled me aside. "Mrs. Taylor, you should read this." She handed me a stapled paper titled, "My Hero." Carter's handwriting sprawled across the page, uneven but sure. My hero is my grandma. She taught me that love doesn't always mean saying yes. It means protecting people even when it's hard. She says truth is like sunlight, it burns first, but it makes things grow. I had to step outside before I cried in front of the children. The breeze was cool and the sky glowed gold through the trees. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years, peace that didn't feel borrowed. That evening when we got home, I took out an old photo album. Inside were pictures of Andre smiling with a baby in his arms, working under the hood of his truck, laughing at some long-forgotten joke. Carter leaned against my shoulder, pointing at each one. "Grandma," he said softly, "do you miss him every day?" "Every day," I whispered. "But missing someone doesn't mean you stop living. It means you carry them with you while you do." Later, after Carter went to bed, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city lights shimmered on the river, and I could see the faint reflection of my own face, lined older but calm. I thought about all that had happened, the lies, the courtroom, the letter that turned to ash. Nina was still in prison serving time for fraud, and though part of me pitied her, I never visited. Some lessons are meant to be learned alone. I opened the Bible that had been Andre's and found the letter I'd written to Carter years earlier, the one tucked between Psalms and Proverbs. I unfolded it, read it one last time and smiled. Then I slipped it into a new envelope and wrote on the front, "To be opened when you turn 18. Before bed, I walked through the living room, pausing by Andre's photo on the mantel. The lamplight touched his face, and for a moment I imagined him there smiling that quiet, humble smile of his. "We made it, baby," I whispered. "He's safe. He's growing." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall soft and unhurried. I stood at the window watching it blanket the streets, the same city that had once taken everything from me now giving back in silence. Justice hadn't come in one moment, it had unfolded slowly like winter turning to spring. And in that stillness, in that gentle forgiving quiet, I finally understood what Andre had been trying to teach us all along, that love when it's real doesn't die. It just changes shape.